Well, it's road trip time, but it's actually going to be quicker than me going to Monroe. Damn. Well, it's been 3 weeks since I've done any content on Louisiana Monroe. Kind of wonder how they've been doing. See if they're actually on track of still making a bowl game. And they're just going into the early portion of their conference games. And okay, maybe I was a little more hyped up with that Northwestern game than I should have been. And okay, I got nothing there. That's highly disheartening seeing that in the Coastal Carolina game, and then especially the Troy game. It doesn't look like they've really been that competitive going into the conference play. So yeah, overall on the season, you got that Northwestern game. In all seriousness, this game should have been a lot closer where it was. Where going through the first half of this game, it ended up being 18-7 at the half. Like, offensively, they were not bad through the air. Armando, 10 for 19, 129, a touchdown. No picks. Yes, he got sacked 3 times. But they finally got in their transfer, Nick Trujillo. And his impact was kind of shown very quickly for the fact that that first touchdown pass, a 34-yarder on that opening drive to start out a 7-play, 75-yard drive, gave them a lead. And you felt that, oh, they may be able to push something in, have Trujillo as being a more of a deep downfield threat. And then once you went further onto this game, you realize the Warhawks were just going to be overmatched. But this first half should not have been as bad as it was. Because if you look into their first few possessions, a lot of that first half in general. After that first possession, Northwestern responders real quick, drive down the field very easily, 13-61, yada yada, ties game. Monroe drives the ball back, misses a long field goal. One thing you kind of realize off of Louisiana Monroe, Luke Stagg does not have much of a leg. You're not going to be able to get much outside of 40 yards, and you kind of just have to learn to live with it. It does make it to where the offense is going to have to go and be... You're going to have to be more willing to take those 4th down chances. Third possession, 8 plays, 53 yards. Once again, driving down the field, down to the 22 of Northwestern. And because of that same reason, they went for it instead of taking a 39-yard field goal and turnover on downs. Each one of those first 3 possessions, that could have been potentially 10 points, potentially 13, 14, maybe even 17 points on that end. In that case, if you get it, you're going into the second half, you could potentially even have a Warhawks lead instead of an 11-point deficit, and you feel disheartened that this game looks worse than it actually is. Especially once you got later on in the game. Burley McReynolds had some solid gains, 8 for 49, but only 8 attempts. The game started to get away from him, so a lot more people got more attempts. Once you got to the second half, though, is the fact that they allowed Preston Stone to pass for 262 yards, 3 touchdowns, no interceptions. What they did early on in the game is they tried and doubling Griffin White, their top receiver, to the fact that he only had 3 catches for 64 yards and a touchdown. All of that ended up coming in the second half. The problem is they played a lot of zone defense there. They were going to allow the receivers to catch the ball and try to, between Hayden Elegon, Drew Wagner, Hunter Welsing as a tight end, to the fact that they were able to get more people involved besides just Wild. And also it doesn't help that Caleb Komalafe kind of ran straight through him. They started to put that game away, and offensively they just couldn't keep up. 273 overall, over 500. You take that with what it is. You're hoping to be more competitive. It should have been more competitive, but it's not a big loss in the situation of how this season is going to turn out in the end. You're kind of hoping that the rest of conference play was going to start to go a little bit better. And unfortunately, Monroe was not able to keep them off the ground. The big difference for this game was the fact that Monroe was 1 for 13 on 3rd down conversion, 1 for 4 on 4th down. They could not stay on the field consistently. They basically, it was 50-50 on time possession. 14 for 28, 176, 1 touchdown, 1 pick, and Herring's lone touchdown on a scramble was also an interception. They were kind of playing through a bit of a heavier downpour. It was more of an effective offense through the 20s. It was not an effective offense to get the ball into the end zone. And then you get to Troy, who You kind of figured Troy was going to be one of the favorites in the Sun Belt overall. Once again, this is one going into the early third quarter. They stayed in the game. It was 17-14 with Monroe's first drive going for a touchdown. So it's a 3-point game. And their offense just falls flat. A lot of the stat lines for Monroe actually was better than the Troy Trojans. It's just you couldn't make up for some mistakes on offense. The pick six that Armenta threw in the second half really kind of ended up having this game broken open. From the mid-third quarter through the next 5 possessions, all turnovers. You're not able to make up for that many missed opportunities back to back to back to back and be able to compete with a strong team, especially in your conference. They weren't making the missed field goal, the 2 interceptions, the fumble, and a turnover on downs. This could have been a completely different game. As I say, 20 first downs. They held Troy to 13 first downs. They're 5-2 on the season, 3-0 in conference play. So you know Troy is good as a mid-major team in the Sun Belt. This is not one where you can just casually, even at home, be able to make that many mistakes and not be able to capitalize on the positions that you really put yourself in the first half, and we're starting to fight back into this game, and then second half, after that first drive, show absolutely nothing. To the point of now, Monroe is in the middle of the West of the Sun Belt standings, 3-4 on the season, 5 games to go. The point that they're trying to get into is trying to get into a bowl game. Fortunately for them, there is this week game against Southern Miss, which is the toughest game on the schedule. And then you see the other 4 games on the schedule against the bottom feeders of the Sun Belt. Yes, Old Dominion also 1-2 in conference, 4-3 overall. That's going to end up being a tough matchup at home. But it's like you go those last 3 games. South Alabama, 1-6 overall, 0-3 in conference. Texas State, 0-3 in conference. Louisiana, the Raging Cajuns, as the rival. This is a down year for them, and they're 2-5 overall because of a double overtime win against Marshall, 54-51. Almost wish I could have been to that game because that just seems absolutely nuts. But getting into this week's game in Hattiesburg, we have the Southern Miss, or otherwise known as 2024 Marshall. Southern Miss fired their coach after going 2-10 overall last year, one of the worst teams in the FBS in general. Charles Huff comes in from Marshall after winning the Sun Belt with 10 wins and beating Lafayette in that conference championship game to get to that bowl game being 7-1 in conference. So you would kind of think you're thrown off by the fact that the conference championship coach leaves that program at the end of their contract, doesn't get any sort of extension, and then goes to the last place team that fired their coach. Yes, Southern Miss has a solid history overall on their franchise to be able to be a pretty nice Sun Belt team in general, but going from first to last is not what you'd expect for a coach going into a new position that he was doing well. And the players, in that same way, they didn't get it either, because you had 21 members on the Marshall team transfer with him to Southern Miss. Overall, it was a massive departure from Marshall, and they brought in 56 players overall. Yes, they lost 46, but you could nearly make an entire team of 2024 Marshall players. They brought in their starting quarterback. They brought in their starting running back. They brought in 3 receivers. They didn't bring in the tight end or any offensive lineman, but the lineman itself, 4 of the 5 offensive linemen were out of eligibility. You even brought in their punter. You think some of that success from those bigger name programs is going to end up carrying over. You just didn't know how a lot of this was going to coalesce in general. Things being more gradual on a success scale for a team that fired their coach. No, this is actually immediate success. You look how they've been so far on the season. Starting out, the loss against Mississippi State. Relatively competitive, 34-17. Only 199 through the air. Relatively competitive, but you also kind of found out shortly after, State's actually quite solid. but already 4 wins of the season. And then that Louisiana Tech game, which really was one of the most disappointing games that they played this year, as they dominated everything on the stat line, doubling the first downs, over 500 yards of offense, 392 through the air, and it's only one turnover of the day. So what actually happened? You look at so many of their drives. Like, take out the first drive, they were going 3 and out. Second drive, 4 plays, 75 yards, touchdown. Southern Miss third drive, 10 for 55, ends up in a field goal. 5 for 25, gets picked off. Punt after 6 plays. Field goal missed after 8 plays. They have long sustained drives where they get the ball down the field. They just can't convert down in the red zone that often, to where they just have to settle for field goal attempts. And you kind of see that's how Louisiana Tech is. They're going to give up yards between the 20s. But it is a lot of a bend don't break defense. Only giving up 18 points a game, which is top 25 in the country. They couldn't get enough offense in the red zone to be able to persevere and end up losing their first non-conference game of the season that wasn't against a Power 4 team. But now at 5-2, we're here where we're at. We have them getting another home game, actually going to be their homecoming. With what they have now, Braylon Braxton, dual threat quarterback, 14 touchdowns, 4 picks with just over 1,700 yards. And this is his second year as a full-time starter. Last year being at Marshall. Yes, he had some time with Tulsa in his 3 years with them. But his most efficient so far as the running game has been up and down, to say the least. Jeffrey Pittman coming in from Mississippi State, just over 4 yards a carry, 6 touchdowns, 419 yards. Backup running back Matt Jones also transferring in, this one from Ole Miss. And unfortunately, he hasn't been able to get his success to carry over with Southern Miss, just under 4 yards a carry. Now, a lot of their offense has been spreading around to a bunch of different receivers, most of them coming in from the transfer portal. Micah Davis coming in from Marshall. Carl Chester actually being the only one that was on the Southern Miss Golden Eagles last year. But Tyshawn Chapman from Marshall. Metcalf from Marshall. Braylon Brown from Marshall. Caden Morris, starting tight end from Western Michigan. A lot of bodies getting consistent playing time and getting consistent targets. All 6 of them getting over double-digit catches for the season so far. And that does actually include Pittman as well. But overall, one thing this team actually has been struggling with is they're not exactly the most well-disciplined. The Golden Eagles' offense is pretty proficient whenever it's able to not get stymied near the goal line, getting nearly 30 points a game, nearly 400 yards a game, unfortunately just over 80% in the red zone. Defensively, they're a bit lackluster, averaging just 3 points a game less, giving up over 400 yards, and actually being quite solid in the red zone. Now, unfortunately, you'd think if you had a bunch of people carrying over from one staff onto another, the discipline for the team is going to carry over. If you have respect for a coach that you came with in Marshall, this would be one that you'd be able to limit the penalties. Keep yourself on schedule, not from mental errors, but nay. They're barely in the top 100 in total penalties and one of the worst in the country in penalties per game. To their favor, though, they cause their opponents to be highly undisciplined as well, as they force almost the most penalties in the country by their opponents. There's going to be lots of flags being thrown on both sides. Now, as a 13.5-point underdog, in order for Monroe to end up staying in this game, they do need to control the time of possession. As if you're trying to go into the shootout with the Golden Eagles, Monroe just doesn't have the firepower. Yes, it's nice for Bibbs and for Trujillo to be able to make more of an explosive offense where they don't have to rely so much on McReynolds, Palmer Smith. Armenta still has 6 interceptions on the season, and trying to make him throw the ball more than 25 times for a game, he's going to make a mistake or two, and what's happened off of it, it's cost them. To the point where, their last 3 games, just the score kind of just got away from him each time in the second half. I wouldn't be surprised if this ends up staying a close game first half, and it's one where defense kind of goes bend don't break early on, they're going to have to make some stops. They're going to have to get some pressure on this quarterback, make Braxton make mistakes through the air, try to make them one-dimensional for the fact that their running game hasn't shown that much yet. Haven't proven that Pittman and Jones and others are going to be able to get consistent effort on the ground. So you're going to need these Dylan Howells and Flemings be able to get pressure on him on the edges and be able to, else Braylon Braxton be able to just chunk the ball down the field and all around the defense. But it's one where if Monroe wants to more securely set a chance for them to make a bowl game, this would be a nice one to try and pull off an upset. Yes, Southern Miss, just like Troy, is undefeated in conference play. That Troy game should not have been as lopsided as it was, but I'd also say the same thing for the Coastal Carolina game and the Northwestern game. This is getting to be too much of a pattern for the Warhawks, and hopefully they can contain that second half lack of progress, lack of success that they've had through the month of October. In a rough month for them. Let's hope the Warhawks can finish fast. But that all being said, thank y'all for watching. We're getting into the second half of conference play and the second half of the college football season in general. More content coming soon. More with Louisiana teams in general. And we'll see how it ends up going. But yeah, if you enjoy it, please like, subscribe. Please comment down below on anything you want to see, you want to hear. And we'll see what happens next. Hopefully the Warhawks can turn it around, get back to 500 in conference play and in overall. See y'all next video.